Hello everyone and welcome back for another edition of the Money Pros. I'm Oliver Tutz, certified financial planner practitioner, and I'm going to be your host for the next half hour as I am every Sunday as we talk about issues related to your money, how to make it, how to keep it, and hopefully how to help it grow. We want you to have the information you need so you can make smart financial decisions, and that's the whole purpose of the Money Pros. Today we've got a full show in store for you. Among other things, we're going to have a special guest. She's Lynn Riley, attorney and partner at Cameron & Middleman in Providence. She's our estate planning pro, and she's going to be here to talk to us about elder care planning. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. We're going to talk about savings versus investing. Do you actually know that there's a difference between the two? Which one are you doing? Which one should you be doing? We're going to cover the details of that. But up first, we're going to talk about something that I think is critical to talk more about here in America, and that's the crisis of college affordability. A college degree is becoming almost impossible to afford these days, and I want to spend just a few minutes talking about some of the costs and then some of the things, proposals, and other acts by other folks to hopefully make it a little bit easier to afford. Certainly nothing's going to fix this problem in the long term. But first of all, let's take a look at what the cost of a college education looks like. These numbers coming up from the College Board, which is large organization, obviously has a lot to do with college SATs and things like that, but they track the price of college educations. First up, in-state public tuition average across the country, $18,391 per year. That includes room and board, but that's the average, and I'm here to tell you in Rhode Island, if you go to University of Rhode Island, that cost is going to be a little over $25,000 a year, including room and board. Now, if you want to go outside of the state to an out-of-state public institution, average cost of tuition, room and board, $31,701 in 2013. And more bad news to add to that, some of the more prestigious public colleges outside of Rhode Island, like University of Michigan, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, those costs will be well over $50,000 per year. And finally, private schools, you want to send your kid to Brown University, Dartmouth, Harvard, or even some of the lesser known schools like Colgate and Bowdoin and some of those that you might be less familiar with. Average cost of a private school, $40,000. And many of the schools that I just mentioned, tuition costs nearing $60,000 and some cases over $60,000 a year. So we're talking about a 4-year undergraduate education that could cost anywhere from $80,000 to $200,000. And for too many students and parents, that means significant student loans and massive costs. So let's take a look at some of the statistics because it only gets worse. Those prices, as bad as they are, take a look at how those prices are growing. This is a graph, numbers generated out of information from the Labor Department, and this is basically a graph that shows you the price increase since 1985 for a variety of different costs. So we've got the Consumer Price Index on there, price of gasoline, which is that really jagged number, cost of housing, medical care is that purple line that we talk about, how rapidly increasing medical care costs are, but all of those things pale in comparison to the exponential increase in the cost of a college education. Fortunately, 2012 to 2013 was the lowest growth year in the past 20, but still exponential growth is making college education more and more affordable. Further, there's increasing information that student loans are making it less likely for people to do other activities that are important to the economy, like buying a home, buying a car, taking on other debt that helps drive the economy. $1.2 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, a massive, massive bubble of loans. And shockingly, students can't even refinance these loans to lower interest cost loans. So what are some of the things that are going on maybe you should be aware of to try to address this issue? Nothing that's going to solve it overnight. But recently, President Obama signed an executive order extending the pay-as-you-earn program, which is basically a provision that allows students in certain instances to limit their repayment costs to only 10%, no more than 10% of what they earn. So some effort being made there to reduce the burden of repaying a college loan. But it doesn't apply to everyone. Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts senator, proposed a bill recently, which was unfortunately shot down, that would have allowed students with loans to refinance the debt into lower cost loans. That bill didn't pass, but hopefully it'll have a chance to pass in the future. And finally, an interesting headline that I just caught before we started the show. Starbucks announced a program. Starbucks, the coffee giant, announced a program to actually pay for employees, full and part-time employees, college educations via an online program in conjunction with Arizona State University. So there are public and there are private solutions to this problem. This is something we've got to pay more attention to. All right, up next is Lynn Riley, attorney and partner with Cameron & Middleman. We're going to be talking about elder care planning, so stay tuned to the Money Pros. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Money Pros. I'm joined now by one of our most tenured Money Pros, Lynn Riley. She's attorney and partner with Cameron & Middleman in Providence, Rhode Island. And we're going to be talking about something that in some ways is a little bit different. In some ways it fits in perfectly with your specialty, which of course is estate planning, a topic that we've covered several different times on the Money Pros in different respects. But today we're going to be talking about something called elder law planning. So is it fair to say related but different than estate planning? A subset of estate planning? I mean, how would you sort of characterize it?
It's definitely related. Estate planning is focused more on what happens when I die and how do I transfer my assets to my loved ones at my death to avoid probate, minimize taxes, make them immediately available, but protect them from my family's own creditors. Mm-hmm. Where elder law planning focuses more on those concerns, but also what happens if I live, mm-hmm. but I become seriously ill or disabled? Who's going to care for me? Who's going to manage my finances? If I'm going to have significant increased care costs, how am I going to pay for those care costs? Mm-hmm. So it's more disability planning, special needs planning, and long-term care planning strategies. And
as the name would imply, elder care planning, is it the type of planning people tend to look at when they're maybe slightly older than when they should be probably looking at their estate planning? I mean, in my experiences, we've talked to clients that need to get estate planning done. A lot of times they have school-age children and things like that. Are those the folks that are doing elder care planning generally?
Not necessarily, but if you are younger and you are disabled or have a disabled spouse, a lot of times that special needs planning, comes into play because you're going to have a lot of increased care costs issues for that spouse or a child.
So. Okay, so how does one, or what are the things that should be going through somebody's mind when they figure out if they should be concerned with estate planning or should they be concerned with elder planning? Do they do the two things simultaneously? Do some people do one and not the other? I mean, people are listening, they're like, geez, do I need to do this or do I need to do the other thing?
Well, your attorney should be the one guiding you in that respect because each situation is really different. Like I said, if you are disabled now or you think you're going to be ill or seriously ill in the near future, immediate, long-term care planning should be an immediate concern.
Okay.
If you have a taxable estate, an estate that is above the $5 million and change exemption amount or even above your state exemption amount, you're probably going to be more focused with estate planning because you have sufficient funds really to pay for your care. Mm-hmm. But if you're close to the state exemption amount in Mass and Rhode Island, right now it's $1 million in Mass and close to $1 million in Rhode Island, and it will be $1.5 million in January of 2015. If your assets are that or less than that, you should also consider, if I become ill, how am I going to pay for these long-term care costs? So it may be more appropriate to focus on elder care planning or special needs planning.
Okay, so it's a function of your current and anticipated health, the size of your net worth, your balance sheet essentially, right? And you have to sort of evaluate those things. And I'm anticipating that many people have to be concerned with both estate and elder care planning simultaneously, right?
That's correct.
So you don't do one in an exclusion of the other. So one of the things we want to look at, one of the things you provided to me, which I thought was interesting, I thought we should share it with the audience, is for those people that are not familiar with elder law planning, you sort of broke it down into 5 steps, the 5 steps of elder planning, and I hope you can walk us through each of the steps so we have a better handle on it. So if you put up that slide, and the first step is understanding the family dynamics. So what does that mean? What do we need to figure out as step 1 of the elder care plan?
That's critical because as part of the elder care planning, you're determining who's going to make decisions for me for health and finances if I become incapacitated. So if you're dealing with married clients, is it a first marriage? Is it a second marriage? Mm-hmm. Do they have children together? Do they have children from prior relationships? How do the children get along with each other, with the parents? Where are they geographically located? Are they going to have time to care for one parent? Do they have the financial wherewithal and ability to be able to handle the parent's finances, or does that child, adult child or family member or friend have their own financial difficulties or issues, in which case it might be more appropriate for a professional advisor to serve in the role of handling somebody's finances. So understanding the family dynamics is extremely critical to have a plan that works for the entire family. You might have a child that might have special needs. You might want their inheritance to go into a special needs trust so they don't lose certain benefits. So the dynamics is really critical in that first step.
So as the advisor, and obviously the clients would have to have a handle on this as well, but it's understanding sort of the soap opera of everybody's family so you don't blunder into some mistakes that aren't suited to the situation, right?
Absolutely.
So the next number 2 of the 5 steps, review the existing documents. So what documents are we talking about here?
Whatever estate planning documents they have in place, their wills, if they have a healthcare power of attorney or a financial power of attorney, if they have any trusts, you need to see if they're legally sufficient. They might have moved into a new jurisdiction and they may no longer be legally sufficient. You have to see if they're in conformance with the client's current wishes. They may be outdated and need to be updated. Their situation may be changed, and what might have been a will for younger children might be inappropriate for an older couple that might need to put assets in an irrevocable trust for asset protection.
Do you see situations where a good estate plan, one that was designed properly, is no longer suitable because this issue of elder planning has now come into play, and what was sort of good for the estate plan is not good for the elder law plan? Are there scenarios like that?
Happens all the time, because a very good and typical estate plan would be the use for a couple of revocable living trusts where there's a trust for each spouse so that assets are available to a surviving spouse but won't be taxed when the surviving spouse dies. But those assets are completely available to be spent down on your nursing home costs. So if nursing home care and how to pay for the cost is an important concern now, that plan won't be appropriate.
So you shouldn't just assume that because you've got a good, solid estate plan that it's also applicable to these issues with elder care planning, long-term care, attached assets, things like that. Next up, reviewing the client assets. We alluded to this a little bit earlier, but what's the importance of looking at what the client has with respect to this planning?
Well, you need to know what their total assets are so you can guide them as to whether they should be focused on estate planning more or your long-term care planning. You need to know how those assets are titled and what kind of assets they are.
And really big, as we said, really big levels of assets may negate the need for elder care planning if they have significant resources to pay for care out of their own pockets, right?
It's true, but also how they're held, and certain assets may be protected for Medicaid purposes, so you may want to take certain assets and put them in a asset protection trust for Medicaid purposes, but you may want to keep retirement accounts out. So whether they're retirement assets or non-retirement assets are also very important, and who you have for beneficiaries with respect to life insurance and retirement assets are important. You don't want to name an ill spouse or a child with special needs as a primary beneficiary of a retirement asset or life insurance if it's going to go to be expended on their care.
So it's not just the level, it's titling of the assets, the nature of them themselves, and things like that. All right, so now we're finally on step 4 is actually developing the plan. Let me talk about it this way. What are some of the typical documents, typical things that you're looking at with respect to an elder law plan?
Well, with the client's input, you're going to want to incur or develop for the client a healthcare power of attorney so that they can name in successive order who's going to be making medical decisions for them, their wishes regarding end-of-life decisions. You'll want to have a durable financial power of attorney so they can name in successive order who's going to manage their finances. You'll want to determine whether or not a will is appropriate, or in most cases, trust is appropriate, because you can avoid guardianship proceedings for a person that might need care by having those assets held in a trust. When you're dealing with trust, the second question is, should it be revocable or should it be irrevocable?
Right.
We talked about situations where a revocable trust, one for each spouse, may be perfectly
One
appropriate.
we talk about a lot.
Right,
Yeah.
may be perfectly appropriate, but it may be now that an irrevocable trust should be done in addition to that plan, and certain assets transferred there, or in substitution. Especially irrevocable trusts are important if you want to protect a segment of your assets from your nursing home care costs.
All right, so I'm going to put up the last bullet point, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Executing and maintaining, which I know is an important step. I don't mean to diminish the importance of execution and maintenance, because things change and you've got to address those changes with adjustments to the documents. But I want to make sure I get to the last question. We talked about it earlier, which is if nursing home care is imminent for someone, ideally you do this planning years in advance, right? But you don't always have that foresight. Are there things that people can do with care imminent that can help preserve some of these assets.
Yes, and the sooner they see an attorney that does estate planning, elder law planning, the better, because there are certain strategies that you can take and certain transfers you can make to family members without losing eligibility for Medicaid benefits. But there's only a certain narrow set of circumstances. So if you transfer a house to a caretaker child who's taken care of you for the last couple of years, that is not a disqualifying transfer. Or to a disabled child, or to a trust for a disabled child, that's not a disqualifying transfer. If you have a child taking care of you, you might be able to have a care contract where you're paying the child for the care they're giving you. You might be able to use gifts and promissory notes and certain annuities to protect a certain amount of assets and still qualify.
You've got to get in and see that attorney, but there are things that can be done to rescue some of those assets. All right, I'm going to have to make that the last word. If you'd like to contact us, if you have a question for Lynn or any of our money pros about anything having to do with your finances, check out our Facebook page, send us a message. You can tweet at the Money Pros as well. And finally, you can send us an email, moneypros@foxprovidence.com. We want to hear from you. And if we hear from you, we promise we'll answer your question on air or off. You'll get an answer to your question. So let us know. All right, up next, savings and investing. Did you know there's a difference? Do you know which one you should be doing? We're going to talk about that coming up next on the Money Pros. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Money Pros. One of the most, I find, common misconceptions people have about what to do with their money is not understanding the difference between saving and investing. Oftentimes, the terms are used interchangeably, when in point of fact, they're actually two completely different activities. And in most cases, people should be doing both, but they should have an idea of when they should be saving, when they should be investing, and how much money should be contributed to each thing. So in an effort to try to clear up that misunderstanding that I think a lot of people have, wanted to show you a couple slides. The first one is some points to keep in mind when you need to be saving. And the first one is near-term goals and emergencies. So if you have an emergency fund that you want cash on hand for a non-specific goal, but it's an expense that could pop up at any time, that's really a savings activity. You want to be putting that money away. You want money for a vacation, you want money for a new car, a new set of furniture, a large expenditure that you can't necessarily pay for out of one paycheck. Those are savings activities where you want to put money away for that particular expense, and that's what we talk about when we talk about savings. Next criteria for saving, inflation is not an issue. In other words, the thing you want to buy, because you're likely to want to buy it in the next week, 6 months, 18 months, really even out to as long as 5 years, you're not worried about the cost of that item increasing in price dramatically. So the inflation cost of that item is not something that you have to adjust for. And finally, a key criteria for savings is that you can't accept any loss of your principal. In other words, if you're saving up for new furniture and that's $2,500 and you're going to buy that new furniture in 6 months, you can't risk the chance that the money you've put away isn't going to be $2,500 but only $2,000 because the market went down 10%. So you really can't, in your savings, accept any risk of principal. However, there's a difference between savings and investing. When should you be investing? Let's take a look at the slide. All right? Investing is completely separate. Some things to keep in mind. Goals are 5 or more years out. So typical things are going to be college education for kids, retirement savings, saving up to leave a job to start a business, something like that where the goal is more than 5 years out. Then it's really an investment goal rather than a savings goal. Next one, have access to liquid funds for emergencies. Can you invest? If you have savings and access to liquid funds for emergencies, then you can afford to invest. But if you don't have savings, you really should not be investing. Next one, goals are subject to inflation. Things like retirement and college, we just talked about earlier in the show, where the costs are rising rapidly, you can't afford to put your money in low-yielding savings accounts. You need to do better than that. These prices are rapidly increasing. You need investments rather than savings to pay for them. Finally, or not finally, but bullet point number 4, you need your money to work for you. To counteract the inflation, you need your money to make money. It's not just going to be about what you put away, but also what your money can do for you. That's an investing activity. And finally, near-term declines can be accepted. Look, if you've got a goal that's 10 years away, a decline over 6 months is not relevant, okay? Now, you have to be careful about what you invest in. You have to understand what near-term declines mean relative to your long-term investing goals. But they can be accepted in the short term if the goal for the investment is the long term. The real danger here is when you save for investment goals or you invest for savings goals. Don't screw the two things up. So hopefully, with an explanation of the differences between the two, starting with savings, building up that emergency savings account, then turning to investing, you'll have some of your finances straightened out. All right, up next on the Money Pros, we're going to tackle the Money Pros mailbag. We've got a question about retirement plans for self-employed individuals, so we're going to handle that. Still more to come here on the Money Pros. Welcome back to the Money Pros. All right, I want to handle a viewer question, which I think is a great question, comes up all the time. And we had a viewer write in to ask about essentially self-employed retirement plans. Question is, I'm leaving my company to work independently as a consultant, which I have to tell you is a very common scenario. I want to make sure I'm saving for retirement. Being self-employed, what are my best options for retirement savings? All right, so this is really critical because when you leave company employment, oftentimes you're leaving behind things like pension plans, 401ks, and other retirement savings vehicles that you just took for granted. When you become self-employed, when you're on your own, these things are now up to you, but there are some excellent alternatives for self-employed individuals, and specific to this situation, it sounds like as a consultant they're going to be working more or less as an independent contractor, not having a lot of employees and things like that, and keeping in mind that this can be a very complex topic, but in this situation there's two types of plans that I want you to consider as options. The first one is a SEP IRA. Very easy to set up. You can set it up at virtually any financial institution, bank, or brokerage firm. Has pretty high contribution limits. You can contribute up to 25% of your compensation to over $50,000, so you can pump in quite a bit of money into a SEP IRA. And the second one is a somewhat newer plan, and that's called a solo 401k. It is somewhat related to the 401k you might have known from your previous employer, and that one allows you to put in the traditional 17.5, that's your own compensation, along with an employer contribution, which will also be your own money. So generally speaking, a solo 401k would let you to get more money in. So depending on your situation, those are two great options. I would highly recommend talking to an experienced financial advisor that has experience with those plans. If you've got a question for us, send us an email at moneypros@foxprovidence.com. Tweet at us. Look for us on Facebook. That's it for today's show. Look forward to seeing you again next time right here on the Money Pros.